Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Kat Spada, and this is your Fortnightly FREQout mini episode. Today, I'm sticking to the traditional format of a FREQout, talking about something that I'm interested in, I've been thinking a lot about, but it's a little on the outskirts of my wheelhouse. This past week, I've been doing a lot of doom scrolling. Maybe you have too. My attention span has been so splintered that I hardly have had the focus to watch movies or even like the most basic comfort food TV. So even though I'm not a music critic, I'm going to talk today about pop and nostalgia and the sense of community brought by live music. And yes, you're going to hear me talk a lot about Taylor Swift. Before I get into it, I hope you all enjoyed last week's episode where Anita and I talked about the Dirty Dancing movies. I was recently recommended to listen to the podcast Sentimental Garbage, and the first episode I saw was about Baz Luhrmann's Strictly Ballroom, which the podcast accurately refers to as Dirty Dancing for Freaks and Losers. If, like Anita and I, you want more in the dance movie oeuvre, make sure to watch this weird little Australian movie, Strictly Ballroom, that Baz made before Romeo plus Juliet. And definitely check out that podcast. I really liked it. Also, I want to give a special thanks to all the Patreon supporters who've been hanging out with me in the Feminist Frequency Discord. Between seasons, we did an AMA about the podcast and had a live watch-along of the 2004 movie Debs, which was so much fun. I hope to see you there for the next get-together. Now, this has been an interesting summer for live music and concert films. A restoration of Jonathan Demme's Stop Making Sense was re-released this year and had crowds dancing in movie theater aisles to the Talking Heads' 1980s concert film. U2 is dabbling once again in groundbreaking stagecraft technology with the UV Arena Tour debut at the Madison Square Garden Sphere in Las Vegas. Joining Barbie at the box office, female purchasing power has shown up for concert tickets as well, with Beyoncé and Taylor Swift, of course, but also Le Tigre, Doja Cat, Janelle Monáe, Boy Genius, and lots more on tours that have been postponed throughout the pandemic, but are now back on calendars. The other night, Brandi Carlile brought Joni Mitchell out on stage for a few surprise songs, and I don't think I will ever get over the FOMO of that. But there's even a documentary in theaters right now about Joan Baez. As a side note, if you're interested in women in 60s and 70s music history, I highly recommend the nonfiction book Girls Like Us, which focuses on Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon, and Carole King's careers. Just last night, I enjoyed the sea of nostalgia that came from attending the 20th anniversary show celebrating Death Cab for Cutie's album Transatlanticism and the Postal Service's Give Up. Both acts are fronted by Ben Gibbard, but Give Up also features collaborations with electronic musician Dintel and guest musicians Jenny Lewis and Jen Wood. I felt 2 decades worth of memories flit in and out of my consciousness as I swayed and danced and sang along with over 17,000 other fans. I left with a strong sense of gratitude that songs which had once had me weeping over heartbreak or scribbling furiously in my journal with anger and ennui can still be special to me without being the property of those earlier chapters of my adolescence and young adulthood. I couldn't help but transpose fears of war and memories of COVID isolation onto the lyrics of the song We Will Become Silhouettes, which is about nuclear fallout. But before I move on from Ben Gibbard's influence on my musical development, please allow me to share one of my weirdest celebrity encounters. In high school, I was at a Tower Records browsing the aisles solo while my dad waited outside, a very typical teenage experience for me. An adult man walked up to me in the indie rock section and asked me about the album I was looking at, which was a 90s side project of Ben Gibbard's called All Time Quarterback that had just been released on CD, so this is the era we're talking about. I chatted with this guy for a few minutes. He was asking me about the music and what I was into, and then he said he'd have to check it out, and he wandered off down the aisles. I was a little annoyed to be talked to by some old guy until a couple of hot topic teens eagerly approached me to ask what James Hetfield and I had been talking about. A music fandom of mine that can only be measured in days, not decades, is my newfound obsession with Tolo, or Tuvalu. I had heard her earlier singles Habits and Talking Body on the radio over the years, and I remember her kooky appearance as a guest judge on RuPaul's Drag Race, which is where we all learned that the Swedish pronunciation of her name is Tuvalu. But it wasn't until about a week ago that I stumbled upon her Austin City Limits headlining set, which was being live streamed on Hulu. That's the first time I really saw her perform, and I heard songs off her latest album, Dirt Femme. Look, you don't have to tell me twice to get on board with Swedish pop music, but there was something about her ACL performance that totally captivated me. Barefoot, wearing a snug mesh outfit, she reminded me of Bo Derek in the movie 10. Sexy, confident, I was hooked. That night, I watched about a dozen of her music videos, and I was lucky enough to find tickets to her show that was playing in my town not 2 days later, which, by the way, during the encore, she did like a slowed down ballad version of Robin's Call Your Girlfriend, blending Swedish pop on Swedish pop, and I cried. It was like, how am I a fan of this woman for 2 days, and I'm losing it right now? But there's just something about her casually sex-positive lyrics that made me think about the pop princesses of the 90s and the early aughts who were chewed up and spat out by a music industry that hypersexualized them in ways specifically geared to make them objects of fascination for men. With Tuva, I get this sense, just a sense, I mean, I don't know, but I feel that she's driving all of the sexuality in her songs and performances. She's owning her queerness and a physical sensuality in a way that makes an audience of women and queer men feel happy and fun and free. Last year, she even launched her own label, Pretty Swede Records, and so far every song of it has been an absolute banger. She even released a second visual counterpart to her album, Dirt Femme, in collaboration with interpreters, performing every track in American Sign Language, as if I couldn't love her anymore. The sexuality in her music may be what has drawn me in, but it's certainly something that will probably keep her from mega stardom in the conservative US market, which is really interesting. It made me think about different receptions to Bjork's sexy songs. Big Time Sensuality, I think, was seen as sweet and light, but pagan poetry didn't even chart in the US. So I'll be interested to keep learning more about Tuvalu. She uses both. The question of how much sexuality is quote-unquote allowed for female pop stars obviously brings me to Taylor Swift, as do my ruminations on nostalgia and looking back at music from earlier parts of our development as audience members. I'd love to be able to speak objectively about Swift and the Eras Tour movie, but I do feel like you have to disclose your level of Swiftie status before anyone can decide how seriously to take your reading of her prolific output. I've been listening to Taylor in earnest for the past 11 years, since her 2012 album Red, which began her transition from country music into pop. I'd heard a couple of her adolescent songs play on the radio before that, and I just totally rolled my eyes at them. It wasn't for me. But then something about her songwriting on Red got me right in the gut. My journey with Taylor is actually very similar to that of comic book artist Kate Leth, whose graphic novel Molgoth just came out. Kate has talked a lot in their stories about how, as a non-binary person, their Taylor Swift fandom has allowed them to celebrate a girlhood in themselves that is unquestioned and joyous. Even if you are Swift skeptical, I highly recommend reading Taffy Brodesser-Akner's recent essay for the New York Times Magazine about her experience at the Eras Tour, which I've linked in the show notes. She talks about things that have often confounded people about Swift as a performer, like her not overwhelming vocals. Brodesser-Akner writes, "We had endured a long moment of female artists whose voices seemed outsized for the body of a regular human, melismatic, with 10 notes to a syllable of a word, or a gravelly voice, where a woman sounds as if she is digging down, grinding something out. Consider Taylor's approach. A voice so pure and pretty that it makes you wonder why so many of her musical peers and predecessors work so hard. It's not an otherworldly voice, but a specifically worldly one. She sings how you would sing if you were talking and became so overcome with emotion that your voice was lifted and carried by it. It's how I would sing if I could. I really appreciated that because while I've appreciated Taylor's lyrics so much and I love to sing along to them in the car, yeah, she doesn't have like a knock you out voice. And so I've wondered, like, man, how did she get so successful? It's not about the voice. Later in the essay, the same approachable level of talent applies to Swift's dancing. Allow me to read another passage. There's not a lot of sex in this show, the husband of a fan in my section said now. He was bored by the Speak Now era. That's because this isn't for you, I told him, and I found myself getting angry as I spoke. She wasn't created to please you like the other women pop stars. She created herself to please me. She escaped the machine where women are only allowed to be pop stars if they don't anger or threaten men. This just isn't for you. He squinted his eyes and furrowed his brow and pursed his lips and nodded like he understood. But I didn't care, and I turned away. The husband wasn't exactly wrong, though. No matter how grindy or seductive Taylor's dance moves can be, she's also making funny faces while she does them. During vigilante shit, where the choreography isn't not like a burlesque show, she has a move where she puts one leg up on the seat of a chair. Sometimes when she performs it, she puts her hand on her chest, fingers pointing south, and starts to slide it down as she sings, "Lately she's been dressing for revenge." But as her hand passes her solar plexus, she gives a scandalized, "What, me? Look," and laughs with her audience. Her dancing is a combination of intricately executed choreography and the kind of literal gesture dancing that has you put your thumb and pinky to your head to indicate a phone call. It's a form of dancing I haven't done in front of anyone for years. It's the kind of thing I used to do with a group of other young women or girls when there were no boys around, or at least no boys we cared to impress. That's what this entire concert reminded me of. Time I spent in my own teenage bedroom, singing songs and pinballing between sexy stripper moves and goofy square dancing. Maybe that's what Eras really is. The acknowledgement of girls as people to memorialize, of who we are and who we were, all existing in the same body on the same timeline. You are your sluttiest version, your silliest version, your most wholesome, your smartest, your dumbest, your saddest, your happiest, all at once. Again, I think Taffy Brodesser-Akner just really nailed it with this entire essay. But that kind of revelation of like, why is this hitting me in such a strong way? I've heard these songs so many times. I think she looks really goofy while she's dancing to them. It is just that feeling of when you sing along to music, when you dance in the shower, when you aren't really being watched. Maybe you think you're performing the way she is? I don't know. I don't have it nearly as nailed down as Taffy does. I think she does a much better job than me. But if you'd like to read more about Taylor's awkward, sexy dancing, Abby Montiel wrote a piece for Them called The Plop and the Plight of Being a Queer Taylor Swift Fan. That's also linked in the show notes. Just read it to find out about the plop. There's so much to unpack in the Eras tour and in Taylor's image and everything that's right with it and everything she's done wrong. While so often she's reduced to being a girl who has a lot of famous boyfriends, many of her most scathing songs about vengeance and heartbreak and disappointment are about her business dealings as a teen and young woman trying to be in control of her empire. I myself have guested on the Holy Swift podcast and wondered why she is sometimes so sexless before growing my ass up a little bit and getting that that's really not the point. I was personally thrilled to be able to see the Eras Tour movie in a mostly empty theater. I'd seen clips of audiences standing and scream singing, but since I'd not been able to actually go to the tour myself, I wanted to be able to watch the show. Luckily, my theater was just half a dozen old grandmas like me, happily seated and quietly bopping along to the music. I felt like I had a private audience with Taylor, with her dancers, her backing band and vocals, and an inventive stage setup that must have employed hundreds of talented craftspeople to devise and execute. I thought about how this one woman, who's in her mid-30s, has 10 album cycles to review in a way that uplifts the fantasy land of the teenage girl, The way young women in their early 20s are like newborn fawns learning to walk. The lessons learned over and over again through friendships and romances gained and lost as she became an adult. The deeply personal approach to her career, and the creative writing exercises that begat so much of her recent folksy efforts. You know, the Postal Service released one album in 2003, and I listened to it from front to back countless times. Taylor Swift threw 10 albums, 4 of which she's re-recorded, documentaries, social media obsession, a bunch of music videos, some of which she directed, some of which are honestly beautiful little short films. This complex fandom that like occasionally I feel really excited to be a part of, and other times I'm like, oh my God, how can I mute this? Like, all of this has made me cringe. It's made me cry. It's made me angry. It's given me intense joy. It's given me songs that I've listened to pump myself up or to revel in feelings of love and happiness. If that's not the experience of being a woman just writ large, then I don't know what is. So yeah, please let me know on social media if you have thoughts about Taylor Swift. And if you have thoughts about Taylor Swift that are boring, then, you know, you don't need to tag me in that. But this whole year with the Eras Tour and everything, the controversies earlier this year, which honestly made me like not want to go to the show for a while. If you're on the journey that I'm on with Taylor Swift, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it. That has been all for this week's episode of Feminist Frequency Radio. I'm on Twitter sometimes at cat_ex_machina, and you can follow the podcast on all of the socials at FemFreak. I'll see you next week for a full-length episode. Bye!